Hi, welcome to the training about Tucson Unified School District private school services regarding Titles 2 and 4. This is Lynn with TUSD, and this is a repeat of the training that was provided via Zoom and in person in August and September of 2022. For those of you who are new to federal title services, I just want to make a note that Titles 2 and 4 are served based on the geographic location of the private school. And any private school that falls within the geographic boundaries of Tucson Unified School District could participate with Tucson Unified School District on the following federal entitlement programs. That's Title 2A, which is professional development for K-12 teachers and leaders. Title 3, which is language acquisition services to students. IDEA, which is exceptional education services for students. And Title 4A, which is the student enrichment grant. So today I'm going to be talking specifically about Titles 2 and 4 because those are administered by myself and my team, but I have also put up contact numbers for Titles 2 and Title 3 and IDEA. One of the little known facts about federal funding, even for Titles 2 and 4, is that the funding services require a data-driven needs assessment because it is the responsibility of the district to make sure that decisions regarding the use of federal funds is aligned with the student needs at sites. So when we are looking at your needs assessment, we really need student data to determine whether or not activities that you and resources that you are requesting the use of federal funds for align with student needs. Activities must align to the highest priority student data-driven needs. And so oftentimes schools will request things that really can't be provided, and it's really based on the fact that we do not have student data around an activity that might be being requested. It's also important to note here that standardized assessment data is required. The use of standardized assessment data is required to report what the student needs are. Before we get too far down the line, I do want to provide just a little caveat here in that federal programs and communicable diseases. So I just want to point out that COVID-19, now monkeypox and polio are part of our program landscape. So all federal activities and services managed by TUSD must follow the TUSD guidance or rules in place at the pertinent time. This becomes important because if you have a professional development activity and it's travel, let's say, and even if travel was previously approved, if Tucson Unified rescinds all travel to its employees because of any disease, even if it's not listed here, then that would also flow down to the private school activity, and we would not be able to allow private school activities because they fall under the district. We would always let you know when something like that comes up, but I do need to make you aware of that. So I want to start by talking about Title 2 first. There are many commonalities between Titles 2 and 4, but we're going to start with Title 2, which is professional development for K-12 teachers and leaders. It is professional development to support student needs based on student needs data. Well, we can't have a program without money, so I want to take a moment to discuss with you the preliminary allocation for Tucson Unified School District this year for Title II is $2.5 million, and I do expect to see a slight dip or a decrease in that. We have a current negotiated indirect rate of 6.27%. The indirect rate is the cost of just doing business. The staff that may not necessarily work directly with you, but are involved in processing paperwork, such as human resources, finance, procurement, those kind of people. We also have what we call allocable direct, which basically are those salaries that would not exist if we did not have a Title II program. So in the case of private schools, that would include part of my salary and part of the salaries of Hank and Lily, who also work in my department, who you will be talking to quite a bit if you participate in these programs. So we take the $2.5 million and we subtract the $202,263 off the top. And we divide that by the total number of students, which is 48,164. You can see that 44,000 of those students roughly are TUSD students and roughly 4,000 of them are private school students, which gives us an estimated per pupil allocation of $48.92. We then multiply that per pupil allocation by the number of students reported for each private school, and that is what makes up the private school's allocation for Title II for that year. It is worth briefly mentioning two private schools at this point is that basically Tucson Unified is allocating two private schools using a methodology that is actually prescribed by ADE in our grants management or in our application. So the good news is that private schools should not really worry about whether or not they are getting their fair share, because Arizona Department of Ed has specifically set up the application to make sure you do get your share. Also, private schools may allocate up to 75% of their communicated preliminary allocation. The reason we do not allow private schools to allocate all of their preliminary allocation is because allocations can change between preliminary and final allocations, and we want to have a little room to make sure that private schools are not going over their allocation. Private school allocations are updated after final allocations are received by TUSD from Arizona Department of Ed, and private school allocations, final allocations, are sent out to each private school individually with an allocation letter going through the same information. What was the total amount? How was the amount derived? And what is the allocation for each individual school? I want to go through some of the Title II private school, what I call rules of engagement. Services must be secular, supplemental, and aligned to the needs assessment. That is true of all federal program service. They must be secular and supplemental. And according to guidance, the data must be using standardized student assessment data. So federal funds should complement or augment ongoing work. These things are over and above what is work that important work that is already going on at the school and would not be able to be accomplished if federal funding were not available. Professional development activities that include non-secular content may be partially allowable. If professional development is something that the school should be providing, then it does not qualify as supplemental. So an example of that might be if a school adopts a new math curriculum, there really is an expectation that the school will train staff on the implementation of that curriculum, so it really doesn't qualify as supplemental under Title II. Services should meet or must meet learning forward type standards, and by that we mean that these are significant initiatives at the school that's based on student data, not just something that somebody wants to do. It's sustained and ongoing, job embedded, no one-time workshops, conferences, or meetings. Professional development activities are for K-12 teachers and school leaders only. Many private schools have a pre-K program. Pre-K teachers and instructors are not allowed to or eligible to take part of the Title II funded activities, and this is because they are not funded for the school district either. Non-instructional professional development is generally not allowable, and by that what I mean is sometimes we'll get a request from a school to say, hey, our school has adopted a new student information system and we really need to send our office manager to the training so they know how to use it. Well, that's not instructional professional development, so it would not be allowable, and if you think about it, it's really not supplemental because if you are adopting a new student information system, you should expect to have to train personnel on that. But professional development for support staff, instructional support staff, may be allowable. So for example, a teacher's aide or an instructional assistant certainly is working with kids and may be allowable for certain types of professional development. I do want to point out that Tucson Unified School District does need professional development outcome data, not just a narrative of the plan data, but actual data. I also want to make sure that schools understand that we cannot bundle services. An example of that in the past has been, well, this company said that if I train all my teachers on this program, I can have the curriculum for free. Well, that is a bundled service, and let's be honest, we all know that there is nothing free. So the bottom line is if a student is ever going to touch or interact with it, it is not eligible for Title II-A funding. So let's just review the Title II portion of your needs assessment. Again, professional development requests must align to student data. So we're going to ask you, what are your expected outcomes? The school will describe how student needs are being met. We will look at whether the requested professional development meets the criteria for supplemental. There are questions on our form that ask specific questions regarding the supplemental nature of the professional development. We also want to know how the effectiveness and implementation of the professional development be measured. What data are you going to provide? Generally speaking, we need to know the 5 W's. Who is going? What is the activity? When is the activity? Where is the activity, and why are you doing it? All professional development activities must be approved in advance. Activities with travel must be approved in the grant by Arizona Department of Ed. Major deadlines regarding that are October 27, 2022. All travel plans from February 2023, and this is September, but that's not really true. We have modified that to say June. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Must be identified and budgeted for ADE application approval. And it's important to note that even if February rolls around, if Arizona Department of Ed has not approved the application, private schools would still not be able to take part in that activity, even if they meet those deadlines. Another major deadline is March 1st, 2023. All fiscal year 23 activities and procurement requests must be submitted to Tucson Unified School District on a formal request form by March 1st, 2023. Attached to your email, you will find the private school professional development and travel flow chart, and you will also fill out completely the TUSD travel and purchase request form. We must submit claim forms when they are required and submit professional development feedback. I really want to take a minute to talk about financial nuts and bolts because this is oftentimes where we run into problems, and that is meeting deadlines to allow processes to take place. Tucson Unified School District is a very large school district, as you know, and it's important to know that there is not a special team other than the 3 of us that work in our office to work on private schools. That all the requests for private schools actually get put in the pipeline along with all of the schools in TUSD and the departments in TUSD. So a private school request doesn't have a special process other than it has to come through us. It just falls in with all the other requests in the district, which are numerous. So because of that, we ask for a minimum of 20 working days to process activity requests without travel. And that travel is in-state and out-of-state. If there is travel involved, we must have a minimum of 40 working days to process travel requests. Remember, the travel should be planned in terms of airfare at least 30 days in advance to get the best rates anyway. Another important fact, July 1st financial rollover limits the ability of Tucson Unified School District to support any activities with the next year's money if that is occurring in July or early August on a prepaid basis. That's not a hard and fast rule 100% of the time, but it's a pretty good rule that we will not be able to support activities in July. Part of that is because TUSD has a closure in July for the 4th of July week. The district is generally closed, so by the time people come back and they close out the June books and they open the new system, it's often July 8th before the new system is even available to staff to start processing things. Because of that, and because of that 20 working days, and we are in line with every single district and department in the school district, or every school in the district and every department in the district, you can imagine what that queue is like. So here are the do's. Do have all activities pre-approved. Do use approved vendors. TUSD has a list of approved vendors. Provide all requested information and file paperwork in a timely manner. It is really important. If Hank or Lily are reaching out to you, that is the same as me reaching out to you. They are reaching out to you because they need information, and it is critical that you respond to them on a timely basis. When we submit purchase request forms, the justification must be complete. Information about items and attendees must be complete. We must attach copies of registration forms and applicable conference brochures. We may also need quotes. If you have a formal quote, we would need that as well. If you are unsure or need assistance, please ask questions. We are always more than happy to assist you. Assisting you on the front end is so much better than trying to do damage control or jump through hoops and provide you something that you need after the deadlines have passed. And honestly, if the deadlines have passed, we probably will not even process them. If you happen to have travel and you have a conference registration, or if you have travel and you have a hotel, you must always verify payment of the conference hotel 3 to 5 days before arrival directly with the hotel. So that would be the attendee checking to verify payment. If for whatever reason the hotel has not been paid by then, they should reach out to either Lily or Hank or myself, privateschools@tusd1.org, to say, hey, I checked with the hotel and this hotel has not been prepaid yet. Please note, do not check 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance, because TUSD will not pay the hotel more than a week in advance of the arrival. So it doesn't do any good. We know that it will not have been prepaid at that point. If you have a registration, you can confirm conference registration or event registration after the receipt of a Tucson Unified School District formal purchase order. I do want to talk for a minute about how that works, because you will submit a request. We will process all the internal documentation that we need to in the district, and once we have permission, then we can submit for a purchase order. It is not allowable to do formal registration and commit TUSD funds in advance of receiving a formal purchase order. The formal purchase order is the authorization document that says, yes, this is okay, and you can go ahead and register. Tucson Unified School District will not register attendees for a conference. Sometimes when a vendor receives a purchase order, they will do what I call passive registration. And so what that means is, because attendees' names are listed on the purchase order, and that might be important for you to know as well, the attendee names are actually listed on the purchase order. The company receiving that purchase order from TUSD sometimes will go ahead and register attendees. However, it's also important to know that sometimes they do not. So it's always really important to have attendees confirm or do their conference registration after they have permission, and the permission comes in the form of a Tucson Unified School District purchase order. If attendees register before they receive a Tucson Unified School District purchase order, we will cancel the purchase order, because what has happened then is a procurement violation. In TUSD, we do not have the authorization, nor do you have the authority to obligate district funds. The only group that has the authority to obligate district funds are the superintendent, the governing board, and the purchasing department. The purchase order is the formal vehicle by which you are given permission then to register. If you do so outside of that, it is a procurement violation. In TUSD, if there are 3 procurement violations, an individual can lose their job. Because we work with so many private schools, we just don't even allow it. If we find that TUSD funds have been formally committed before a purchase order is in place and it gets flagged, we will cancel it. So don't, again, going along with that, commit or promise TUSD funds in advance of an actual purchase order, i.e. register for an event before you have a purchase order. Change any part of the service or product defined in the purchase order. In other words, you go to a conference and you say, hey, You know how they have those wonderful vendor fairs. You go down and you say, oh, they have these really nice books and I'm going to charge them to my room. Well, we've actually had that come up where then the hotel tries to bill TUSD for those. So you cannot change any service or product defined in the purchase order. Never engage with vendors or their representatives in a way that might compromise objectivity, and that includes letting them know what kind of service allocation your school has. Never bundle goods and services in ways that are inconsistent with grant intents. So again, it's really important about that registration. Make sure that your attendees register, and it's important to remember that we will never pre-register or register you. This is a private school calendar taken from a Tucson Unified School District calendar that has been modified for private school, and it really talks about and lists some of the deadlines of various program deadlines we have. We already talked about the two most important ones, October 27 and March 1st, but this one also has other deadlines listed. The other thing that's really important to know about that October 27 deadline is that that is the last day to request capital. Capital must also be pre-approved by Arizona Department of Ed. We never have purchased capital with Title II, but I'm going to mention it here. That's really usually happens more in Title IV. So you will receive a copy of this in the email where we distribute this presentation. So in general, professional development should all be completed by June 30, 2023 to fall within the current fiscal year. PD is changing due to ADE application processing timelines, and the major impact was on travel. So even since the inception of this training, which happened in August and September, there have been changes again. So July and August, in July and August, we can sometimes prepay registration only registration with the prior year funds. So we could, for example, prepay July and August registration for events with FY22 funds that technically expire June 30th, 2023. And the reason that we can do that is because of when the formal contractual obligation happens. Registration is the one exception where the contractual obligation happens at the time the purchase order is cut. But again, you still have to meet that March 1st deadline. If you have July and August registration using new fiscal year funds, it is most likely going to be a reimbursement. It is important to note that reimbursement is to attendees only, not private schools, and must be approved in advance. We still have to have all the formal legal paperwork in place before something is done. It is important to note that we can never, no school district can ever reimburse a private school. That is against federal guidance. Professional development activities must be approved in advance. Travel, activities with travel, and this says must be, and I'm just going to say should be due to some recent changes, be approved in the grant by Arizona Department of Ed. To help manage that process, TUSD has two major deadlines. The first one is going to be in the spring when you submit your initial needs assessment, or no later usually than the end of the first week or the beginning of the second week of June. And that is going to cover any travel October 22 through June of the following year. Then we have this year the October 27th deadline, and that really is hopefully travel from February 2023 through June 2023. We had previously communicated a 15-month timeline because of the requirement for pre-approval by Arizona Department of Ed. They have recently indicated that they do not need to absolutely pre-approve all travel. However, they strongly suggest it. So because they have backtracked on that, we are rolling back even the travel deadline to the June. So everything for federal programs ends June 30th of every year. In all cases, travel allowability is contingent upon approval. And when I say that, I mean approval of the district and possibly, usually, approval by Arizona Department of Ed. Travel expenditures will be limited to the maximum of the current rate or whatever was in the grant application, whichever is lower. I'm going to talk about this. ADE recently sent documents indicating that travel may be allowed without prior approval. So to that end, TUSD is still holding the October 27, 2022 deadline for planning travel. We are rescinding the ability of private schools to use funds for travel through September. All PD funds must be used by June 30th. We are going to allow some flexibilities in private schools regarding planned or approved travel. And that flexibility is not so much in where you are going itself, but we may be able to allow flexibility in the number of participants or the dates of travel. So sometimes conference dates have changed, so we can have we feel comfortable having that limited amount of flexibility at this point in time. If anything changes, we will let you know. Well, I've received a lot of comments about our request forms, and I just want to apologize. About 4 years ago, these were so much easier. I just want to blame somebody else. Trust me, we are not asking you for anything that Arizona Department is not requiring from us. And when I say requiring, we have to have these in our application for the funds. So it's really important to make sure you always put your private school name and the name and location of the training. When does this professional development begin and end? And if you're traveling, what are your proposed dates of departure and your proposed dates to return? Requested dates. I want to point out that federal funds are not vacation funds, so we should not be extending the dates of travel before and after what is needed for attendance at the actual workshop. We have to have the full and complete name of any workshop or proposed professional development activity. We have changed this so that we have one attendee per row because we need the full legal name of every attendee on a separate row. And this is really applying for registration and or travel. If it's a contractual professional development that your whole staff is going to, we don't need the name of every attendee. It would probably be one resource activity request with one amount. Here you'll see there's some things that help guide and answer some of the questions. To comply with funding intents, responses are required for the following: what works, evidence-based PD. And then you'll see there's a section there that says supplemental. This is going to tell me whether an activity is supplemental or not. So will this resource activity be required as part of the school's normal operations or delivery of curriculum? If the answer to that is yes, it is not supplemental. Will your school choose to engage in this activity even if federal funds are not available? If the answer to that is yes, then it's not supplemental. Has your school supported or engaged in this activity in the past? If so, what funding source supported this activity? If the answer to this is yes, it's still a maybe. I would need more information. You'll see there's a space for program evaluation and who is attending. So this is actually just the first half of the form. So sliding to the right of the form is really where we kind of get into if there's travel. It's really important to note, do not ever use third-party vendors to plan your travel. Even for the reimbursement portions, TUSD will not provide reimbursement to attendees if a third-party such vendor is used. Third-party vendors would be the things that you and I might use if we were going on vacation to get the best deal. Orbitz, Kayak, Cheapo Air. The reason that TUSD will not reimburse for third-party vendors is because vendors often bundle services. They might bundle airfare with a hotel, airfare with car rental, and because TUSD cannot guarantee the federal grant that they are only paying for airfare, they will not reimburse for a third-party vendor, and that is so important. If an attendee uses a third-party vendor, they would not be reimbursed. So what are reimbursable expenses? So it's important to know that if your group is traveling, if it's in-state, they would be driving and we would be paying mileage. And it is expected that travelers would travel together in groups to reduce the cost to the grant. The other thing is if it's out of state, we are always going to assume it's airline travel, and we are going to get a formal quote, and the most we will be able to reimburse an entity is the amount of our formal quote. Usually those costs come in higher than what you can get on the market. But remember, when you're doing that airline, go direct to the airline. Go directly to Delta. Go directly to American Airlines. Go directly to Southwest to book those tickets. Make sure you save your original receipt for the travel and or any luggage you have. Once you return, we will then file for reimbursement. It is also important for you to know that we cannot reimburse until after the professional development and the travel is complete. Just because you pay it and book it up front to get the best deal, we cannot reimburse it because the obligation to the federal government is not until after it's complete. Also, here's where the hotel comes in. For hotel confirmation, attendees must use a personal credit card to reserve the room. They will receive a confirmation. When you file this request, attach that hotel confirmation, which will have a confirmation number and an amount, to that request. It's important also to know that for these things, hotels, the most that can be reimbursed is for an actual conference hotel or the state rate, which, trust me, I don't know where they get their rates, but they're not even close to being enough. So make sure you understand, if you're planning travel, that there's possibly out-of-pocket costs that will not be covered. TUSD can often prepay hotel. We will never prepay conveyance. And the reason that we do not prepay conveyance is because if for any reason an individual is unable to take the trip and they cancel their flight, any credit for that flight is given directly to the individual and not the district. For that reason, we do not prepay conveyance. Again, going back to an earlier slide, we will prepay hotel, and that's when you want to confirm that they actually received payment. I can promise you that 8 out of 10 times, even if they confirm that, attendees should be prepared to use a personal credit card once they get to their destination to cover their room, because the finance office is usually a corporate office and is not very good at communicating with the front desk where you're checking in. Oftentimes, you're also checking in at night when that finance department is closed. So oftentimes, even if we can get it straightened out, it's not until the next day, and attendees may have to cover or put their credit card down to make sure that they have a place to stay. Here's where we're seeing that October 27 deadline and the change that was in August, September. We said it would for all travel through September 23. Now we're saying June of 2023. Travel plans can be made by updating the needs assessment. Actual requests, all actual requests, whether it's travel or not, must be made by using or submitting a formal request form. Putting something on your needs assessment is not the same as a formal request. All PD travel details must be complete, and again, allowable expenditures is the lesser of pre-approved dollars or current rates. Expenditures are paid and reimbursed after approval by Arizona Department of Education. So here's just a quick cheat sheet chart. TUSD may prepay registration and allowable hotel. We will reimburse post-event allowable conveyance and per diem. Per diem is the amount of money that you get for meals and incidentals. And by the way, incidentals would also include local travel, not shuttle to and from the airport, but once you're at the event location, any taxis or things like that. We do not allow rental cars. We only allow airfare conveyance, mileage for in-state travel, and shuttle to get to and from the hotel. Other than that, we do not pay any local travel. TUSD does not pay or prepay conveyance, mileage or airfare, or per diem. We're not allowed to. And we do not pay unallowable or unallocable charges. So again, that goes back to that example that I talked about earlier, where somebody charges books to their hotel, or they go to a president's dinner and decide to charge wine and invite several other attendees to the president's lunch for $300 a plate. Those are unallowable and unallocable charges, and we will not pay them. So now we're going to shift gears to Title IV. Title IV is Student Support Academic Enrichment Grant, and this is really instructional programs and services to eligible students. The targeted services are to improve academic outcomes, and recently they have stressed that the focus really needs to be on struggling learners or underserved populations and programs. And that is somewhat new. It's been around, this is the second year, but previously that had not been a criteria. So I just want to make that known because it's possible that that will come up in a request that you put in. So just like Title II with one small difference, it's the same allocation rules. We have a preliminary allocation of 1.6 million, our same indirect rate. One of the things you will notice here is that there are 44,075 LEA or district students, but the number of private school students here is slightly lower because we had two schools, private schools, that opted out of Title IV funding. So indirect and admin salaries that are charged against the grant, and this is at the top level of the grant, so this is before the district gets its money or the private schools get any of their funds, is $32,515.69. It's important to note that in Title IV, the admin charges are capped at 2%. So as you can see, the district does not even get to garner back the 6.27% indirect rate because admin costs for the Title IV grant is capped at 2%. So we have the same allocability logic that we had in Title II. We have a share of private school admin costs assigned at the district level, and part of what you saw on that last slide is actually part of the salary for the TUSD private school team. The district doesn't take anything at all in this grant because of the cap. It's all just going towards supporting private schools. Final allowable use of funding is determined by Arizona Department of Ed and the districts, which can impact how private schools receive and use funds. Title IV and Title II actually as well have what we call transferability, which means those funds could be transferred. Title II can be transferred into Title I. Title IV can be transferred into Title II or Title I. Tucson Unified School District does not currently exercise transferability. If we did and we transferred those funds, there's two things you need to know. Number one, there is a requirement for meaningful consultation with private schools before that decision is made. However, ultimately the decision is up to the district. Also, if the district did transfer its funds, so for example, if Tucson Unified School District did transfer Title IV funds to Title I, those funds then become Title I funds. They lose all their vestiges of being Title IV, and they must be used by the same rules that are in place for Title I. We have a needs assessment that must be in place. Title IV has three broad categories of allowable activities, and the focus on student programs are well-rounded education. That would include things like visual and performing arts, STEAM, science, government, civics, foreign language, so things like that. Well-rounded education. These are to provide robust and extended opportunities that kids may not otherwise have. It's really not designed to provide basic nuts and bolts education. The second broad category is safe and healthy students and families and communities, and that's really about things like school discipline, socio-emotional health, and safe and healthy lifestyles. Then there's the third strand, which is effective use of technology, and the operative word here is use. This is really a professional development grant. And basically what it's saying is we know there's technology in schools and we want to train teachers on how to effectively use it. There is not a technology waiver. We are very limited on any procurement of any technology devices in professional development in this category. And basically it's up to 15% of whatever is spent in that category could go towards a device. So, for example, if your school spent $100 on professional development for the effective use of technology, we could spend up to $15 on a device that complements that professional development. We've never used it because, as you can see, it's so limited that it's really not that helpful. Private school requests must align to student needs. And it's important to note that if you've been operating with the Title IV funding for a while, it's important to know that it is really becoming more and more restrictive. ADE is really focused on ensuring that resources are developing student programs, not just activities or stuff. They're supplemental to what a school should have in place, and they're programmatically evaluated. I want to go back and talk about this. So a couple things, student programs, not just activities or stuff. Sometimes schools will say, well, we want art supplies, and they'll say paper and paint and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a list of stuff. That is, or just kids are going to paint. That is not a program. The question really becomes, what significant program is a private school putting in place that you currently do not have or have not had the ability to have? So we've implemented music programs and things like that. We can buy instruments for that kind of a program, provided it is a new program or it has been previously supported with this same pot of funds. Supplemental to what a school should have in place. So because it should be supplemental to what a school should have in place, TUSD is not allowing requests for normal, like physical education equipment, like playground balls or things like that, because those are things that all schools should have. The other thing that has come up recently are things for, like, let's say, science tables. Arizona Department of Ed would ask and has, why does this school want science tables, and why don't they already have them? This is something that they feel a robust school or a normal school should have in place, especially if it has high school programs. The other part to that is, with just activities or stuff, is the programmatic evaluation. How can we programmatically evaluate a science table? Becomes very difficult. So what I will tell you, for those of you who've been around a while, things that we could have put in for 5, 4, 2, even 3 and 2 years ago, we really can't put in for those things anymore because they are becoming more and more restrictive about thinking about, are these really supplemental, and how are we going to programmatically evaluate the impact on students? What you're seeing here is the Title IV private school request form. And again, don't forget to put in the name of the private school, what grade levels, who is the requester, and the date of the request. Some of these fields will automatically populate. If it is in yellow, you need to fill it out. If it's in green, it will automatically populate. It's going to ask you specifically, what are your requesting items or resources? And by that, if you have specific items, even if that's a link put in there to a particular thing, provide that. It's important to know that Amazon is not an approved vendor. Never, ever, ever send us a list of requests where you have taken screenshots of things on Amazon, because that is not an approved TUSD vendor. We ask for the vendor item number, and we're going to ask you how you think, or what area do you think this Title IV request falls under. Is it well-rounded? Is it safe and healthy? Is it effective use of technology? And we want you to describe how this satisfies the intents of the grant. How does it improve outcomes for kids? And then there's those supplement, not supplant questions and evaluation questions. So all this information is important. Title IV is one area where capital procurement frequently comes up. So for example, musical instruments would definitely be capital, and they must be pre-approved by Arizona Department of Ed before TUSD can move forward with procurement. That October 27 deadline is very, very important for you, for those of you who think you want to develop some kind of program that involves capital. So, what is capital? Capital are durable items with an expected life of more than 1 year. They are likely to be repaired rather than replaced when possible, and they retain their original form. So a guitar, a violin, things like that, a kiln, a STEM card. These are all capital items. Capital requests are made by submitting a formal request and updating the needs assessment. Provide exact item quotes from approved vendors. Formal requests must be made using a fully completed request form on or before the March 1st, 2023 deadline. So I want to be very clear here. October 27th is the deadline to let us know that you're going to request it so that we can put it in our grant revision to Arizona Department of Ed. And we hope that we will have that grant revision approved before the March 1st, 2023 deadline. Either way, the school should follow up with us on or before then to see if they can formally request it. Last year, it is important to note that the revision that Tucson Unified put in December of 21 was not approved until April of 22. So what you can tell then is that even if your school had met that October 27 deadline last year, we would not have been pre-approved in time to meet the procurement deadline. And so that is very significant. When schools are considering what they want to purchase or what kind of program they want to develop, spring is really the time to think about that so that we can hit the ground more or less running in the September timeframe of the following year to purchase capital. Because after that, it becomes a lot more difficult, a lot dicier, and honestly, those goods and services probably are not going to be received for students of that current school year to really benefit too much from them. And again, the intent of the title of the federal fund is to benefit current year students and current year staff. The other thing that's kind of special about Title IV is it is the one fund that we have where we can actually make requests for student events or activities such as field trips. So the other part of the form for Title IV, or the second page, really deals more with field trips. I do want to point out that we only pay entrance fees for students. We do not pay conveyance. We do not pay entrance fees for chaperones or staff. However, I do want to let you know that academically engaging and valid field trips that align with student data are allowed. I still discourage planning student field trips with Title IV. Kind of going back to that COVID-19, monkeypox, and polio, part of our landscape. It would be really sad for a private school to plan a field trip and then have a sudden denial of that or inability to do that because something comes up and there's some kind of mass transmission communicable disease that shuts down those events. These are in-state requests only, even for entrance. We do not provide entrance fees for any activities out of state. Actual requests must be formally made on or before March 1st, and we have to have at least 20 working days prior to the event, and you must use the request form. This part of the request form is different from others because this is also where we're going to ask student information, but we also want to know emergency contact name and phone numbers in case we need them. So just like you would if you were planning a trip for your students, because this is being funded by the federal grant, we need that information at the district level as well. Title IV funds expire June 30th of every year, so this year, June 30th of 2023. So remember I said that where we see capital is usually in Title IV, and private schools are expected to exercise what I'm going to call inventory stewardship. Resources purchased with federal funds remained under the control of the LEA or district managing those program resources, and they really belong to the district. So federal program resources must be used for their original intended purpose and the purpose outlined in the grant under which they were procured. Again, many federal capital resources have been procured in Title IV, but also in ESSER funding. To help manage that and to demonstrate our good stewardship, we provide a list of federal inventory annually. We ask schools to report the location and condition of inventory every year. Every other year, in the even years, we are required to conduct a physical audit of inventory. Federal assets may never be modified or disposed of by private schools. Lost, damaged, or stolen assets are to be immediately reported. TUSD will commence with district protocols regarding missing or damaged assets. This could include the taking of a report and perhaps one of our staff coming out and doing a physical inspection. It could be TUSD school safety and security coming out to your site and conducting searches and interviews. It could be a Tucson Police Department police report. So depending on what is happening with the asset, we do have strict protocols that we must follow regarding missing or damaged assets. Please understand that and know that you are to report those immediately so that we can follow through with our procedures. I want to talk about changes. I'm saying changes afoot to carryover. So for those of you who don't know, carryover exists when a private school, for whatever reason, well, I'm going to go through the reasons. All the funding, federal funding that has been set aside for a private school is not spent in the year that it was intended to be spent. So in January of 20, the federal government came out and said private schools must receive carryover in Title I if, for any reason, not all the funding is spent. And this was largely due to the general feeling that many districts were not providing private schools access to federal resources and really not helping them gain what is actually mandated and always has been since 1965 in the federal law. So because of that, they were saying you must provide all the carryover. Well, now 2 years later, at that time, many districts objected, but they said, no, this is the way it is. And then to follow that, Title II and IV never had that mandate, but to err on the side of caution, in the state of Arizona, Arizona Department of Ed was allowing all carryover requests in Titles II and IV as well, because there was lack of clarity about what the requirements were in those funds. In April, they came out with some new draft guidance. While these are proposed changes and they are not final, I want to iterate here that carryover is designed or meant to deal with compelling circumstances not in control of the private school. There is an expectation that private schools budget and spend all available funds in the current year in accordance with communicated timelines aligned to program intents, and that they are consulting with the district. Failure to request resources or activities according to LEA prescribed timelines is not a compelling reason out of the control of the private school. So let's just talk about this for a minute. So they have really now split carryover and the reasons for carryover into two categories. So when is carryover allowed to an affected school would be in the case of a natural disaster or program delays. Things that are out of control. The private school communicated their wishes. These were approvable and approved, but either natural disaster happened, such as COVID, or the program was delayed through no fault of the private school, but rather by the district. Or maybe the third-party contractor cost significantly less than what was planned, and there were additional needs identified but not acted upon. Approved carryover, if approved carryover is granted by the state for these circumstances, that approved carryover would be held in place for the school that was affected by these circumstances out of their control. However, if carryover is due to services costing less than what was budgeted, or a private school decides not to participate in a planned activity, or the district and the school agree there are no additional needs, carryover for these circumstances could then be granted to the district. That carryover would go back into the general pool of funds available again to the district and the participating private schools. So it's a significant difference. If you had $1,000 in the first column and it's because you have carryover due to natural disaster, that $1,000 could be, once approved or if approved by Arizona Department of Ed, would be held for the specific affected school. In the second column, it would go back to the general pool of funds and would be divided by that 44,000 students. Significantly different. And this is where I'm getting to that. A failure to request resources and activities according to the prescribed timelines is not a compelling reason out of the control of the private school. Private schools should not just assume that they can ask for carryover. This is new. It has not become finalized as far as I know, but it's important to note that the change that fell down in January of 2020 was effective from July of 2019, and I would expect the same to happen here. And I think what this is an acknowledgement on the part of Department of Ed that some districts really had been providing these services, and even though they told Department of Ed, no, we give them everything they ask for, Department of Ed had heard from so many private school constituents that they just didn't believe it, and now they're finding out it really is true. It's important to know that districts are limited on what they can request for carryover, and so if carryover is allowed and held specifically for a private school, it may be at the expense of public school students. And so I think that this is a fair and equitable move forward in this. Carryover requests are done cooperatively between the district and the private school. So what will happen is TUSD will kind of close out the books and figure out where private schools landed in all their federal funding. And then we will come to you and ask you if you are wanting to file for carryover. If you do, there's a form that we fill out, and part of that form includes a narrative regarding the reasons why the carryover exists. And they're going to ask that of both the public school district, or the LEA, and the private school. So there's an opportunity for the private school to tell its side why the carryover exists, and there's an opportunity for the district to tell why it exists. Also, in that same form, they're going to say, well, if we allow you carryover, what are your plans to expend it? It is really important, because this is a change, that carryover must be expended in exactly the manner outlined in the carryover request. So, because carryover determinations are made after the capital deadline, schools should never attempt to budget capital out of these funds. These funds should be more for the things that you would like to do or want to do, but these items are not so critical to your program that they couldn't wait to be budgeted out of the next year. Again, I want to go back to that thing. Remember, I told you that last year we did not get our revision approved until after our procurement deadline. And in the case of carryover, last year it was not approved till February. So you're going to have a pretty short window of time, probably between February and March, to actually formally request something if carryover is approved. So again, it's really important that schools expend funds in good faith and make plans to really benefit their staff and students with all of these funds, and not rely on the idea that there might be carryover. Finally, on behalf of Tucson Unified School District, I want to thank you for attending this training, and I want you to know that we're always available to consult with you. We have a shared mailbox for private schools. It's privateschools@tusd1.org, and we ask that you try to use that as we try to remember to respond to it. The benefit of using that mailbox is that all three of the private school dedicated staff here at TUSD can access that mailbox. It's also important, again, I want to iterate that if the project technical specialist, Henry or Lily, reach out to you and will ask for information, it is critical that you answer myself, them, or the private school's mailbox as quickly as possible, because we are facing many, many tight time frames ourselves. And when they are reaching out to you, it is because they need some information or they have information to share with you. I also want to let you know that private schools may contact Arizona Department of Ed, State's Ombudsperson, for questions or appeal, and the address here is provided, privateschools.ombud@azed.gov. However, I do ask that if you do have questions or appeal that you have not previously discussed with me, that you have the courtesy of reaching out to me first to see if I can resolve your questions. The state ombudsperson is busy. They are really there to serve both the districts and the private schools. So this is not just for private schools to reach out to, it's also for districts. If we are having problems with a private school to either understand something or respond, it is totally allowable for the districts to have the ombudsperson kind of be the arbiter of these events. But at any rate, I want to thank you for attending to us today. If you have any questions, please give us a call. We look forward to working with you this year. Thank you.